Our final speaker is Dr. Katie Chargualaf, and she has spent 19 years as a medical surgical nurse. She's currently assistant professor at the University of South Carolina in Aiken, South Carolina. Her doctoral dissertation investigated the transition of civilian nurses into Air Force nursing and the transition of military nurses into nursing faculty. And I think UT Health Science Center will tell you that military nurses are a great place to get future professors. She recently studied the transition of military vets into becoming BSN nurses, and she's published articles based on her research. Please, Katie.
Thank you. So unlike my colleagues, I'm a qualitative researcher. And as qualitative researchers, we don't largely talk in numbers, we don't use the slides, we like to talk and have conversations. So no slides for me, we will just talk. So I've been asked to talk about why it's so important to include service members in research, and then also what are those challenges to their recruitment and retention in research. And just a little bit of backstory about me. I am a military dependent. My husband was active duty for 21 years in the Air Force, and I was honored to receive care from military nurses. And that is ultimately what sparked my interest to begin to investigate what it meant to be a military nurse. And what I found was I was very interested in looking at transitions to practice. And we had 50 years of research, but nobody had thought to include a military nurse. And I thought, my gosh, how many times do we have to reinvent ourselves and transition to different things? Why aren't we asking military nurses? And so that was the impetus for my dissertation. But I don't have my tentacles embedded within the military actively, meaning I'm not a military nurse. So it's much harder for me to get my hands on and to locate military nurses. Oh, you can't hear? Very good, thank you. Okay, so what we had to do was get very, very creative. And the reason we wanted to do that was because we felt like military nurses had a very good story to tell. You have a very unique life experience and a very unique worldview that is worthy of that storytelling. And we wanted to basically be your voice to the nursing literature because you're not there. But there are a lot of challenges to making sure that we include you. One being, because I'm not actively embedded in the military, I had to go find you. And that meant that I largely start with my network of contacts, and I depend on them to get me started, and then I snowball through. We used social media sometimes. We would reach out to just about anybody who had any affiliation at all at any time with the military. Hey, do you know somebody who might meet this criteria? The problem with that was we tended to go to the same people because that's who we knew, and we tended to burden them repeatedly. Do you know anybody who now meets this criteria? And I didn't want to burn those bridges. And so how then do I find people? It's almost like finding a needle in a haystack for us. How do I find people? And thankfully, what we do is we started out with a network and we got published and people started contacting us. Thank you so much for being my voice. Have you considered, including more naval nurses? Well, I was curious why you included so many Army but not enough Air Force. It's like, well, I couldn't find them. I would love to. I want nothing more than to have equal representation to hear the stories. I just can't find you. And so, thankfully, as more people reach out to me as a result of published research, I now have a different set of networks that I can now tap into. For example, I just got an email last week that says, on your last study, you had outstanding representation from Army and Air Force, but you only had one naval nurse. I said, well, it's not for lack of trying, trust me. I even prolonged the study specifically seeking naval nurses just to try and get their story. Couldn't find them. Other ways that we do, we tend to focus on military-centric areas in the United States, and I reach out to commanders, I reach out to schools of nursing, knowing that there's likely some veterans there. But in doing so, I'm afraid I'm doing a disservice to those veterans who don't live in military-centric areas. Am I overlooking their story? Because we know veterans live all over the country. And it's very likely that those who live in rural town XYZ have a very different experience than those who live maybe in San Antonio or San Diego or wherever. So it's trying to find those veterans, those service members. How do I find them? And then also including our reserve force. Just making sure I heard you. You know, if you're only active a very short period of time, how do I find you? And so I've been thankful enough to be able to locate reserve force in all of our studies, albeit a very small percentage of our population, our participants, but I'm hearing your voice. And so we, as my research team, is having to get very, very creative with the ways in which we network. So I am excited to be here because I get to talk with other military nurses, other veterans, and I get greater ideas about how to find you. I want to tell your story. It's very important for me to tell your story, but I have to find you first. So if anybody has any other wonderful suggestions to help me find you, I would love nothing more than to hear them. Because those are some of the challenges that we encounter. Other challenges that we've encountered include just trying to break through the military email system. I don't have an af.mil account. And sometimes my civilian email does not communicate with that military account. So I'm thinking my participants aren't eager to participate, they have no desire, they don't want me to bother them anymore, when in fact they never got it. So it's, okay, how can I break through that to even get a civilian email address so that I don't have to worry about that problem anymore? You know, or how do I overcome the potential challenges that I'm asking you to tell a story about a very painful experience and making sure that there are the supports for you going through telling me that story? And if I'm interviewing somebody in Alaska, how do I make sure that I have that support for them? And so the coordination of a qualitative study can be pretty overwhelming sometimes. And so I always tap into my military resources